How many times have you had a rough night's sleep or maybe no sleep at all? That kind of describes my night last night. A lot of tossing and turning. Didn't sleep very well. And this passage we're going to look at here is probably the perfect passage for someone who didn't sleep well the night before, as we'll see as we go through this, and you'll understand why. But it's probably one of the most familiar passages in the Bible, and it's Daniel chapter 6, the account of Daniel in the lion's den. And most people are very familiar, whether you go to church or read your Bible or don't read the Bible or even believe the Bible, you've probably heard the account of Daniel in the lion's den. We know the who, that is Daniel. We know what, the lion's den. We know where and when. It tells us those things in the passage. But I want to focus in this video on the how and the why. How does he end up in the lion's den, and why does he end up? And we'll see those things here in this passage. In verse 1 of Daniel chapter 6, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss." So they have this set up for accountability. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. And so what we have here, these 120 satraps, some Bibles translate it the word princes, were appointed to help share the responsibility of leadership in the kingdom. And the kingdom has changed hands in the previous chapter, chapter 5, to the Medes and the Persians. And the kingdom before that was under Babylon. But it's now changed hands, and this new kingdom has a pretty good system of rules. They have some flaws, as we'll see here in a second. But this group would have been kind of like our Senate or Congress in our country. They acted as checks and balances in the kingdom. And so Daniel is appointed one of 3 governors to oversee everybody, and the king is considering, because he has distinguished himself as someone who's trustworthy and faithful, of maybe putting him over everybody. So that's sort of the setting in the background here. Verse 4, "So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him." You know, most people, if someone wanted to find some dirt against you or some issue, they would have no trouble finding that. But with Daniel, they looked and they couldn't find any charge, anything that would carry any weight, that would be serious enough that could get the king's attention. What they're trying to do is get rid of Daniel. They're trying to set him up. They couldn't find anything. I mean, that's amazing. But the next verse, verse 5, is really amazing. It says, "Then these men said, 'We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.'" I mean, how would you love to have somebody say that about you? We can't find any fault, we can't find any charge, but the only thing we can find, and this is after watching him and trying to find something, they observed that he was a very faithful man to his God. So they concluded the only thing we're going to find against him, it's going to have to be something connected to his faithfulness to his God. That would just be an amazing thing to have said about you. But in the next verse, verse 6, it says, "So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said to him," they all assembled before the king, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree." Of course, we know that's not true, because they certainly didn't consult with Daniel. He's the one they're trying to set up. But it says that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. This was a really strange system. The way it was set up, and we do see it also in the book of Esther, where it can't be changed, can't be altered, and not even by the king. And they did it, it's amazing, the reason behind it is so that they wouldn't have frivolous laws, which is amazing because both in Esther and also here in Daniel, it's a frivolous law. But they use it to trap Daniel because they knew that regardless of what the law said, that Daniel was going to pray, he was going to be faithful. So in verse 10, it says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days." You know, a lot of people have suggested, couldn't he have, for 30 days, just kept the windows shut and, in fact, stayed inside the house altogether? He didn't have to make himself visible. It was only 30 days. He could have still prayed to his God, but why did he have to open the window and make himself visible? Well, the answer to that's really quite simple. Could he have done it? Could he have kept the windows shut? Of course he could have. But this is called taking a stand. And, we live in a world more and more where Christians are going to have to take a stand for what we believe in. And that's why this is such a wonderful passage of Scripture, because we see Daniel being faithful to his God, the very thing they knew he would do, which is why they set him up in the first place. So he prays, just like his custom was to do since early days, meaning this was his custom for most of his life. By the way, Daniel at this point is in his 80s. It says in verse 11, "Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. They knew that he would. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. 'Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Didn't you sign this decree?' Well, they knew he did. They were behind it. The king answered and said, 'The thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter.'" He doesn't realize at this point that is the king, that he's being set up. And that Daniel's being set up, but that's what's happening. So in verse 13 it says, "So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him." It's interesting, the king is upset with himself. Of course, it says, Daniel doesn't give any regard to you or your decree. Daniel gave regard to the king. He was faithful. As I said, the passage makes it clear that he had distinguished himself. The king was considering elevating him to be over all of them. That's why this whole thing is happening, because they're jealous. But it wasn't a matter of not giving regard to the king. It's sort of like we see in the book of Acts when Peter and the other disciples are told they can't teach in the name of Jesus, and they said, "We must obey God rather than men." There's nothing wrong with Daniel praying. This was a complete setup, and the king is displeased with himself because they took advantage of him and also of Daniel. Verse 15, now the king is trying to figure out some way out of it, but that's the way the law of the Medes and Persians was set up. There isn't any way out of it. So it says in verse 15, "Then these men approached the king and said to the king, 'Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed.'" Just sort of a reminder here, king, you can't change this. Verse 16, "So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, 'Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you.' Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed." So this den, which was down in, we know because it says later on that they pulled him up out of it. They roll a stone in front of it, and then their rings had a little symbol on there. They would put wax and put that symbol, that signet, was sort of like a signature, into that wax, so that anybody that would break that seal, the penalty was death. So nothing was going to change for Daniel. So the king says, your God who you serve continually, he'll deliver you. You know, the king is hopeful. He doesn't expect that that's going to happen, but he's hopeful that since Daniel's so faithful that his God will deliver him. But you know, I'm not even sure that Daniel expected to be delivered from this. I mean, when you put someone in a den of lions, what is the end result? The end result would be death. And so the situation for Daniel is set. Now, when I said at the beginning that I had a rough night's sleep, and this is a perfect passage for this, you would think that I was referring to Daniel. That is, he had a rough night's sleep in the den, but I don't think he did. There's nothing in the passage that says that he did. I think he probably slept pretty good. But the king, on the other hand, in verse 18, says, now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. So the king had lost his appetite. He wasn't able to sleep. He didn't want any entertainment. Don't bring in any musicians like he would normally do. He's fasting. He can't eat. And again, it's because he knew he had been tricked. And he's concerned for Daniel, who's his friend. Verse 19, then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. You know, I've often said, I wish we had video and I wish we had audio of so many of these passages in the Bible, because, you know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. This would be tremendous to watch this and to see the expression on the faces. When it says he cried out, as often is the case, those words mean he's screaming and with a lamenting voice. No doubt after a rough night's sleep or very little sleep, his voice might be hoarse. I'm sure he probably shed a few tears for his friends during the night. And so as he's screaming with a lamenting voice, the king speaks and says to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And remember, he's screaming this out. He's not expecting to hear anything. And as I said, in most situations, you're not going to hear anything because Daniel would not survive the night. But again, if we had a video of this, it would be amazing to see the king's reaction to what he hears in verse 21. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. Hearing that sound echo up from that den, we don't know how deep it was, but you can almost picture the king, the relief, and probably the tears of sadness were turned into tears of joy as he hears his voice. He says, in Daniel speaking in verse 22, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, that is God. And also, O king, I've done no wrong before you. You know, a professor of mine said years ago, and this was just amazing, this insight. He said, it's not just that God closed the lion's mouth. I mean, that he did. It says so. But what God actually did for that night was he restored the relationship between man and beast, in this case, lions, that was present before the fall. And also will be present, we're told in the Bible, during the millennial kingdom. And that was just like a light bulb when I heard that. I was like, you know what? That's exactly what happened. God did restore for one night that relationship. I wish we had video of the den and what took place down there. You know, Daniel may have had just a wonderful time, maybe even playing with these big cats. I mean, who knows? But it would be amazing to see that. Verse 23, now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him because he believed in his God. Again, Daniel was faithful. In this particular case, God answered his prayer. Verse 24 says, and the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Those lions, of course, were hungry. They hadn't eaten anything that night. And as a result, those who had falsely accused Daniel ended up suffering the consequences that they had hoped that he would suffer. It would be amazing if all of life worked that way, but it doesn't. It says in verse 25, then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So here the king now issues a new decree, and according to the law of the Medes and Persians, it cannot be altered, it cannot be changed. And of course, regardless of whether the king decrees this or not, it is true that the God that Daniel serves is the living God. Verse 28 says, so this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. This is Pastor Dave. You have a blessed day.